Camp Hereford, Texas, July 1944. Oberleutnant Greta Schneider leaned her head against the grimy window of the bus, the vehicle transporting her and 32 other German female prisoners through the immense Texas terrain. Following a 2-month stay at a processing center in New York, they were finally arriving at their designated permanent camp. Nothing she had witnessed so far had prepared her for the scene outside. A man on a horse was galloping across the open prairie, skillfully herding cattle. He was attired in a wide-brimmed hat, leather chaps, and boots adorned with spurs that shimmered under the harsh Texas sun. Following him, other riders on horseback worked together, guiding a herd of what seemed to be hundreds of cattle toward faraway enclosures. Told long ago that modern America was a land of cities and industry, and that the frontier imagery was a nostalgic myth rather than a present-day reality. Yet before her very eyes were men on horseback, performing the exact tasks depicted in Karl May's novels and American westerns. They were herding cattle across the open range with Mein Gott, whispered Liesl Hoffman, a former Luftwaffe communications specialist sitting next to Greta. Are those real cowboys? Actual American cowboys, just like in the movies? Greta had always believed that cowboys were a creation of Hollywood, a romanticized fantasy for the sake of entertainment. It was common knowledge that the American West had been set skills that appeared ancient and genuine, not staged for a film crew. They can't possibly be real, Greta insisted, even as the evidence contradicted her. Cowboys were a thing of the past. Surely modern Texas ranches employed trucks and contemporary machinery, not men on horses. The bus veered onto a dirt path leading to Camp Hereford, and the scenery that came into view was like something out of a Western movie set. There were vast open plains stretching to the horizon, cattle grazing peacefully, the occasional windmill pumping water, and everywhere she looked, men on horseback managed the livestock with a casual mastery that suggested a lifetime of experience. "Welcome to Texas, ladies," Sergeant Williams announced in his carefully practiced German as the bus came to a halt at the camp's entrance. "You all will be assigned to work on the ranches in this area, as part of the prisoner labor initiative. I hope you have a fondness for horses because you will be seeing a great deal of them." "Working on ranches?" Greta questioned, finding it difficult to grasp this unforeseen turn of events. She had been a Wehrmacht supply officer before being captured in France. Her skills were in logistics and administration, not in farming or animal care. "Texas is in need of labor for its cattle ranches," Williams clarified. "The men who typically perform this work are away fighting in Europe and the Pacific. German prisoners are being brought in to fill the gap. You will be placed on local ranches, reside in bunkhouses, and work alongside cowboys who will instruct you in the trade." Through the camp's fence, Greta could see more riders. Some were clearly seasoned cowboys, while others appeared to be German male prisoners in the process of learning the work. One prisoner was being taught how to rope a fence post by a weathered American cowboy, who patiently demonstrated the technique over and over. "This is preposterous," muttered Corporal Anna Kleene, a former military administrator from Berlin. "We are German soldiers and we are being sent to work as cowboys in Texas? This feels like a bizarre dream, not a prisoner assignment." But as they got off the bus and were processed into the camp, the reality of their situation became clear. Camp Hereford's specific purpose was to supply agricultural labor for Texas ranching businesses. German prisoners, both men and women, were being trained in cowboy skills and sent to ranches that were desperate for help due to wartime labor shortages. "Tomorrow, you will receive your ranch assignments," Williams informed them during the orientation. "The people you will be working for are genuine Texas ranchers. They will demand hard work, but they are fair individuals who will treat you well if you perform your duties, and they will teach you cowboy skills that have been handed down through generations." That night, as she lay in her bunk, the Texas heat seeping through the barracks walls, Greta tried to make sense of her surreal circumstances. She had been captured in France, transported across the ocean to America, and was now on the verge of becoming a cowgirl, working on a Texas ranch with people she had only ever seen in Hollywood movies. From outside, she could hear the faint sound of cattle lowing and horses whinnying in a nearby corral. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled, a sound she had only heard in westerns but which was now the authentic soundtrack to her impossible new life. Real cowboys were a reality. She was going to be working with them, and somehow this was her existence now. Dawn arrived hot and brilliant over Camp Hereford as Greta and 11 other German women boarded a ranch truck. The driver was a man who seemed to have walked straight out of a Western film, with his weathered skin, sun-faded shirt, a well-worn cowboy hat, and a look that suggested he would much rather be on a horse than chauffeuring prisoners. "The name's Jim Henderson," he stated, his Texas accent so strong that Greta found it hard to understand his English. "You all are being assigned to the Double H Ranch, my family's business. We manage about 2,000 head of cattle on 50,000 acres. At the moment, we're short-staffed because my sons and most of our usual hands are away at war. So you're going to learn cowboy work, whether you believe you can or not." The journey to the ranch lasted 40 minutes, taking them through a landscape that appeared to go on forever. Rolling plains, scattered mesquite trees, distant mesas, and cattle in every direction. Greta observed Henderson's profile, attempting to reconcile this authentic cowboy with the romanticized portrayals she had seen in films. He was real, shaped by actual sun and labor, not by makeup and studio lights. "Ever ridden a horse?" Henderson inquired, glancing at the German women in his rearview mirror. "No," Greta replied, speaking for the entire group, who all shook their heads. "Well, you're going to learn today. You can't work cattle in Texas if you can't ride. Don't you worry. We'll start you on some calm horses and teach you the right way. By the end of the summer, you'll be able to stay in a saddle all day and rope a calf if the need arises." The ranch house came into view on the horizon, a large building surrounded by corrals, barns, and bunkhouses that indicated a multi-generational enterprise. As they pulled in, Greta saw more cowboys working with horses, repairing fences, and managing cattle with the effortless skill of people who had been doing this their entire lives. "Are these the German girls?" an older cowboy asked, looking them over with open curiosity. "They seem a bit delicate for this kind of work." "They'll get tougher," Henderson responded. "Germans are hard workers once they understand what needs to be done. I had 2 German boys last year who became pretty good hands by the time they were sent back." Greta and the other women were led to a bunkhouse that was simple yet clean, with wooden bunks, basic furniture, and a window that looked out onto the main corral where horses were waiting. The living quarters were similar to what they had at Camp Hereford, but the setting was completely different. They were no longer in a prison camp. They were living on a functioning ranch. "First lesson begins in 30 minutes, Henderson declared. "Get changed into your work clothes. We've provided jeans, boots, and hats in your sizes. You can't handle cattle in your German military uniforms." The change from a Wehrmacht officer to a Texas ranch hand started with putting on American cowboy attire. Greta examined her reflection in a small mirror. The jeans felt unfamiliar after years of wearing military skirts. The boots were heavy, but sturdy, and the cowboy hat shielded her face from the intense Texas sun. She felt she looked absurd, like a child playing make-believe. But when she went outside and saw the other German women dressed in the same way, and when she saw them standing with actual cowboys getting ready for the day's work, the feeling of absurdity lessened, replaced by something more like a sense of adventure. They were about to be taught skills that had shaped the American West by men who were living representatives of a tradition that spanned generations. "All right, ladies," Henderson called from the corral fence. "Come and meet your horses. These are good, calm animals that will teach you how to ride. If you treat them with respect, they will look after you." Greta walked up to the horse Henderson pointed out, a chestnut mare with gentle eyes that nudged her hand, searching for a treat. The animal was large and powerful, and it represented a skill Greta had never thought she would need. But if she was to survive the work on a Texas ranch, she had to master this ancient bond between human and horse, a partnership that cowboys had perfected over lifetimes in the saddle. By the middle of the morning, Greta was beginning to understand why cowboys were so physically resilient. Learning to ride was not a gentle process. It was a direct immersion into skills that demanded strength, balance, and a courage she hadn't needed as a supply officer. The horse under her moved with a power that was both exhilarating and frightening. "Loosen your hips," instructed Maria, a seasoned cowgirl Henderson had tasked with teaching the German women. "The horse can sense your tension. You have to move with the animal, not work against it. Cowboys don't control their horses with force. They form a partnership with them." Greta attempted to follow the advice, but every part of her wanted to hold on tight and maintain strict control. The idea of relaxing while perched on a 1,200-pound animal in motion seemed completely illogical. "You're overthinking it," Maria noted, riding alongside Greta with the effortless grace of someone who had been on horseback since she was a child. Stop being a German officer who needs to control everything. Start being a cowgirl who trusts her horse. The guidance was both practical and symbolic. Greta's entire military background had been built on control, precision, and a strict adherence to rules. Cowboy work, it seemed, called for a different mindset, one of flexibility, adaptability, and reliance on partnership instead of dominance. After 2 hours of riding lessons, Henderson called for a break and had the women gather around a corral where experienced cowboys were working with cattle. "Observe how they move," he said. "Notice how the horse and rider function as a single entity. That's what you're striving for. It takes most people years to reach that level of skill, but you can learn the fundamentals in a few months if you're dedicated." The display was captivating. The cowboys, separating cattle from the herd, moved with a fluid grace that appeared effortless, but was clearly the result of decades of practice. The horses reacted to slight cues, a shift in weight, a touch of a leg, minimal contact with the reins, that created a perfect line of communication between rider and horse. "Your German military likely valued obedience and control," Maria remarked, noticing Greta's captivated expression. "The cowboy way is different. We train horses through partnership, not by overpowering them. It's the same with the cattle. You guide them where you want them to go by understanding their instincts, not by forcing them to go against their nature." "That seems inefficient," Greta commented. "Wouldn't direct control be more effective?" "Give it a try and find out," Maria suggested with a knowing smile. "Spend one day trying to force a horse to do what you want, and another day partnering with the horse. You'll quickly learn which method is better." The afternoon consisted of practical work, moving cattle from one field to another, under the watchful eyes of the experienced cowboys. Greta found herself actually riding alongside the herd, her horse responding to her hesitant commands, her body starting to grasp the rhythm that made riding possible. "You're getting the hang of it," Maria called out with encouragement. "See how your horse knows what to do? You just need to suggest the direction and trust her to take care of the rest. Cowboys and their horses are a team, not commanders and their subordinates." By the time evening came, every muscle in Greta's body ached from the long hours in the saddle, but she had successfully helped move 200 cattle to a new pasture. This accomplishment felt more tangible than any administrative task she had performed in the Wehrmacht. It was physical, real, and connected to the land and animals in a way her previous life had never been. "Not bad for a first day," Henderson remarked during dinner at the ranch house where the German prisoners ate with the American cowboys. "You ladies have determination. I thought some of you might give up after the morning, but you all persevered. That's what's important in ranch work, persistence through hardship." "How long will it be until we are actually helpful?" Greta asked. "You'll be doing real work within 2 weeks," Henderson answered. "You won't be expert cowboys, but you'll be skilled enough to assist with the daily tasks. We are in desperate need of labor, so we'll take whatever level of skill you can achieve." That night, Greta wrote in her journal, "Today I became a cowboy, or at least I tried to. This entire situation is absurd. A German Wehrmacht officer learning to ride horses and herd cattle in Texas, taught by real American cowboys. Yet it is also strangely fulfilling. Ranch work is difficult but honest. There are no politics, no ideology, just practical skills used to solve tangible problems. After years of military bureaucracy, there is something refreshing about work where success is measured by cattle moved and fences repaired, rather than by forms filled out and orders followed." 3 weeks into her time on the ranch, Greta could ride with confidence, rope with moderate skill, and had a basic understanding of cattle management. The transition from a Wehrmacht officer to a working cowgirl was almost complete, and she had developed a true appreciation for the skills she had initially thought of as primitive compared to modern German efficiency. "You're picking this up quite naturally," Maria noted during a cattle drive to the summer pastures. "I thought German military types would be too rigid for cowboy work, but you have adapted remarkably well." "It meant letting go of my assumptions," Greta confessed. Maneuvering her horse around a particularly stubborn steer, I believed that modern America had left cowboys and ranching behind. that Western films were just a nostalgic fantasy. Realizing that this way of life is real and demands genuine expertise has been an eye-opening experience. A lot of people make that mistake, Maria said. They assume that because we have cities and factories, rural life must have vanished. But ranching is still the backbone of the Texas economy and culture. Cowboys are not relics in a museum. We are working professionals who maintain these traditions because they are effective, not because they are quaint. This observation struck a chord with Greta. She had always assumed that German military efficiency was superior to American methods, that German order and precision would naturally be more successful than American informality. But the cowboy way, flexible, adaptive, and based on partnership rather than control, was proving to be incredibly effective in situations she had never before considered. "How did your family learn these cowboy skills?" Greta inquired during a water break. "My great-grandfather came to Texas in the 1870s, Maria explained. He learned from the vaqueros, the Mexican cowboys who had been working with cattle here for generations. He passed those skills on to his children, who then passed them to theirs. I learned from my father, just as my brothers did. It's a living tradition, not a historical reenactment." The idea of multi-generational knowledge being passed down through hands-on apprenticeship, rather than through formal institutional education, was unfamiliar to Greta, who was used to the German military's structured training. But she could see how effective it was. Cowboys learned by doing, under the guidance of experts, developing their skills through practice and feedback rather than in a classroom. "What will happen after the war?" Greta asked. "When your sons and the regular hands return, what will become of us?" Maria's expression became serious. "That will be up to the individual ranchers. Some may offer to sponsor immigration if the prisoners have proven themselves to be good workers. Ranch labor is always in short supply. Good hands are valuable no matter where they come from." The idea of staying in America, working as a cowgirl on a Texas ranch, seemed like a fantasy to Greta. Yet, she had come to learn that fantastic things could indeed become a reality. Cowboys were real, ranching was a modern profession, and German prisoners could learn skills that connected them to the traditions of the American West. Over the subsequent months, Greta's abilities continued to grow. She learned to rope cattle with skill, handle horses with confidence, repair fences, manage grazing schedules, and master the 100 other tasks that cowboy work entailed. The physical labor strengthened her body, and the work itself brought a satisfaction that her service in the Wehrmacht never had. "You have become a real hand," Henderson told her during the fall roundup. "Would you think about staying on after the war? We will need workers, and you have shown you can handle the job. I would be willing to sponsor your immigration if you wanted to remain in Texas." Greta looked at the rancher, trying to process an offer she had never expected. Stay in America as a cowgirl on a Texas ranch. Leave Germany behind for a life of herding cattle under vast open skies. "I need some time to think," she replied carefully. "Take all the time you need," Henderson said. "The war will end sooner or later. When it does, you will have to choose whether to go back to a bombed-out Germany or start a new life in Texas. That's a decision a lot of the prisoners are facing. I just want you to know that the option is there if you prove yourself worthy. And you have." That evening, Greta sat on the porch of the bunkhouse watching the sunset paint the Texas sky with shades of orange and purple she had never witnessed in Germany. Around her, the cattle were settling down for the night and the horses were whinnying in the corral. In the distance, a cowboy was singing an actual cowboy song, not a performance for a Hollywood movie. This could be her life. Not a fantasy or a temporary wartime situation, but a real future. Working on a Texas ranch, upholding traditions that linked the present to the frontier past. The thought was both frightening and appealing in ways she found difficult to express. December 1944 brought cooler temperatures and news of Germany's desperate Battle of the Bulge offensive, a final effort to turn the tide of the war. For Greta, this news seemed distant and almost inconsequential compared to the immediate demands of ranch work and the unexpected sense of community she had found among the Texas cowboys. "Your country is taking a heavy blow," one of the American cowboys remarked during a lunch break. "The war will likely be over by spring. Have you thought about what you will do then?" Greta had been thinking of little else since Henderson's offer. Returning to Germany meant facing bombed-out cities, economic ruin, and a society that would likely judge her harshly for having survived her captivity. Staying in Texas meant leaving her homeland for a life in an enemy country, performing work she had never imagined for herself. "I am considering staying," she confessed to Liesl during a conversation one evening. "Henderson has offered to sponsor my immigration if I remain as a ranch hand after the war. It is a tempting offer. I have received a similar proposal," Liesl shared. "The Martins family on the ranch where I'm assigned said they would sponsor me and 2 other German girls who have shown we can do the work. We are seriously thinking about it." Throughout the bunkhouse, similar discussions were taking place. Of the 12 German women at the Double H Ranch, 8 were thinking about staying in America. The cowboy lifestyle, hard but honest, physically demanding but fulfilling and connected to the land and animals in a primal way, had won them over. "We came here as prisoners believing that cowboys were a Hollywood fantasy," Greta mused. "We discovered that they are real, skilled professionals who maintain traditions that date back for generations. And somehow we have become a part of that tradition ourselves. It feels wrong to leave it behind just because the war is ending." But choosing to stay also meant acknowledging that the Germany they had served was gone, that their oaths to the Wehrmacht were to a regime that had led to catastrophic failure, and that their individual happiness might be more important than national allegiance. "It's not a betrayal," Maria argued when Greta voiced these concerns. "It's about understanding that home is not just a place on a map. It's where you feel you belong and can create a meaningful life. If Texas ranching provides that for you, choosing it over returning to devastation is not abandonment. It's survival and growth." As winter continued, Greta worked alongside the Cowboys, preparing for the calving season and learning obstetrical skills she had never imagined she would need. The work was intimate and demanding, assisting cows with difficult births, tending to newborn calves, and managing the new generation that would ensure the ranch's future. "Cowboys are caretakers," Henderson explained during one particularly challenging delivery. "We manage life cycles, look after the animals, and work in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Modern people often forget that someone has to do this work to keep society fed. Cowboys are not just romantic figures from the frontier. We are agricultural professionals who maintain the food supply." This perspective helped Greta understand why ranching was still economically essential and not just a historical curiosity. America's industrial power was built on an agricultural base that cowboys helped to sustain. Their work was modern and vital, not a relic of the past. In March 1945, as the collapse of Germany quickened, Greta made her choice. She would accept Henderson's offer, apply for immigration sponsorship, and stay in Texas as a professional cowgirl on the ranch that had come to feel more like home than Germany ever had. "Are you certain?" Liesl asked when Greta shared her decision. "As certain as I can be about anything after years of war and imprisonment," Greta answered. "The Germany I served is no more. The family I left behind likely did not survive the bombings. The Wehrmacht that trained me led a nation to disaster. What is there to go back to? An obligation to a failed ideology? That seems far less compelling than building a future doing work I have come to respect." Several other prisoners made similar choices. By the time the preparations for repatriation started that summer, 8 of the 12 women from the Double H Ranch had applied for immigration sponsorship, choosing a life of Texas ranching over returning to a defeated Germany. "You all have become good hands," Henderson told them. "You are welcome to stay as long as you wish." The cowboy tradition has always embraced people from other places who were willing to learn and work hard. "You have done both. That makes you Texans now, no matter where you were born." As Greta prepared to transition from a prisoner to an immigrant, from a Wehrmacht officer to a professional cowgirl, she thought about how completely her worldview had been transformed. Cowboys were not a Hollywood fantasy. They were real, skilled, and essential workers who upheld traditions that connected the past to the present. And somehow, a German military officer had become one of them. August 1945 marked the end of the war and sped up the immigration process for the German prisoners who had opted to stay in America. Greta's application for permanent residency was processed through the bureaucratic system, while she continued her work on the ranch, now as a paid employee instead of a prisoner laborer. "Your immigration paperwork has been approved," Henderson informed her one morning. "You are now officially a legal resident, free to work, travel, and eventually apply for citizenship if you choose. Congratulations, you're a Texan." The transformation felt surreal, yet also natural. Over the course of 14 months, ranch work had become her identity more completely than her service in the Wehrmacht ever had. She now thought in terms of cattle cycles, grazing patterns, and weather conditions, rather than military logistics and supply chains. "How do you feel about your decision?" Maria asked during a cattle drive to the winter pasture. "Grateful," Greta replied with honesty. "I expected to spend the war years in a prison camp and then return to a devastated Germany. Instead, I learned cowboy skills, found work that I am good at, and discovered a home in Texas. It could have been much worse." But the integration process was not without its challenges. Some of the local Texans were resentful of the German immigrants taking ranch jobs, questioning whether former enemies should be so readily welcomed. Others, however, appreciated the solution to the labor shortage and judged the workers based on their competence rather than their nationality. "Mrs. Henderson doesn't like having German girls on the ranch," Greta overheard one cowboy say. "She says it isn't right that we are employing people whose country killed American boys." The sentiment was understandable, but it was still painful. Greta had not wanted the war, had not chosen to serve in the Wehrmacht, and had done nothing personally to harm any Americans. Yet she bore a collective responsibility for Germany's actions, a burden that would stay with her for years to come. "Some people will always judge you for being German," Henderson acknowledged when she told him about the comment she had overheard. "You can't change that. What you can do is prove through your work and your character that you are more than just your nationality. Most reasonable people will judge you by who you are, not by where you were born." The advice was practical and embodied the American values that Greta had grown to admire. Individual merit was more important than group identity. Personal character trumped national origin, and people had the opportunity to reinvent themselves through honest work. As 1945 came to a close, Greta had fully transitioned from a prisoner to an immigrant cowgirl. She had learned to rope with expert precision, could ride from dawn until dusk without a complaint, and understood cattle management as well as cowboys who had been raised in the trade. These skills connected her to Texas traditions while also providing real economic value. "I never thought I would see the day," Maria remarked, watching Greta expertly separate a calf from the herd. A German Wehrmacht officer turned Texas cowgirl. "But here you are doing the work as well as anyone." It was the highest praise Greta could have imagined, acceptance as a competent professional by the very people who represented the authentic tradition of the American West. By 1950, 5 years after the war had ended, Greta was in the barn of the Double H Ranch, teaching a group of young Texans, including Henderson's granddaughter, the finer points of roping cattle. Her German accent had softened over time but was still noticeable, a subtle reminder of her immigrant status, even as her cowboy skills clearly showed she belonged. "You have to anticipate where the calf is going to go," she instructed, demonstrating the technique with a practiced motion. Cowboys don't just react. They read the animal's behavior and position themselves accordingly. It's a partnership between human intuition and livestock instinct. The students watched her with a respect that would have been unimaginable 5 years earlier. Greta had gained a reputation as one of the best cattle handlers in the area, her expertise overcoming her German origins through sheer, demonstrated competence. "Miss Greta," Henderson's granddaughter Sarah asked, "is it true that you learned all of this as a prisoner? That you had never been on a horse before you came to Texas?" "Completely true," Greta confirmed. "I was a Wehrmacht supply officer, about as far from a cowgirl as one could be. But Texas ranchers needed labor, German prisoners needed work, and somehow we found a common ground in the traditions of the cowboy." The transformation had been extraordinary, not just for Greta, but for the entire Texas ranching community. Dozens of German prisoners had chosen to stay after the war, becoming permanent residents who added to the local culture, while helping to preserve the traditions that defined Texas's identity. "Do you ever regret your decision to stay?" one of the students asked, a question she was often asked. "Never," Greta replied without a moment's hesitation. "The Germany I left behind no longer exists. Texas gave me meaningful work, a community that accepted me despite my origins, and a life connected to the land and animals in ways I never knew I wanted. This is my home now." After the class, Henderson joined her by the corral fence, and they both watched the cattle grazing in the peaceful afternoon light. "You have become a real asset to Texas ranching," he remarked. "Not just a good hand, but a teacher, passing on the traditions to the next generation. That's what cowboy culture has always been about, skills passed down through practice and apprenticeship." "I am grateful that you gave me a chance," Greta said. "Not many people would have offered immigration sponsorship to an enemy prisoner. Your willingness to judge me by my work rather than my nationality changed my entire life." "You earned it," Henderson replied simply. "Cowboys have always come from all over the world. Native Americans, Mexicans, freed slaves, immigrants from every continent. What truly matters is whether you can do the work and respect the traditions. You have done both." As evening settled in, Greta thought about her unlikely journey from a Wehrmacht officer to a Texas cowgirl. She had discovered that cowboys were not just a Hollywood fantasy, but a living tradition, that enemy captives could become mentors and friends, and that a home could be built in the most unexpected of places through honest work and mutual respect. In the summer of 1960, 15 years after the war's end, Greta Henderson, she had married Henderson's younger son John in 1948, stood on the porch of her own small ranch. She watched her children, half German and half Texan, practicing the roping skills she had taught them. The integration was now complete. The German prisoner had become a Texas rancher, a mother and a member of the community, indistinguishable from her neighbors except for the accent she had never completely lost. "Mama, look!" her daughter Emma called out, successfully roping a practice dummy on her first try. "Excellent form," Greta praised. "Your grandfather would be proud." Henderson had passed away 2 years prior, leaving the Double H Ranch to his sons, but he had also left behind a legacy of accepting German prisoners as worthy workers and potential Americans. His willingness to look beyond nationality had transformed dozens of lives, including Greta's. "Do you still think about Germany?" John asked, joining her on the porch after he had finished his own work. "Sometimes," Greta admitted. "I wonder what happened to the family I left behind, whether any of them survived the war and its aftermath. But I don't regret staying. Texas gave me a life that Germany never could have, meaningful work, a loving family, and a community that judges me by my character rather than my nationality." That evening, the local Ranchers Association held its annual gathering, and Greta attended as a respected member, not as a curious immigrant. Her expertise in cattle management was highly sought after. Her opinions on ranching matters were valued, and her German origins had become an interesting part of her story rather than her defining feature. Mrs. Henderson, a young journalist covering the meeting, asked, "You are one of several former German POWs who stayed in Texas after the war. What do you want people to know about that experience?" Greta thought about her answer carefully. "I want them to know that cowboys are real, not a Hollywood fantasy, that the American West is not just a part of history, but a living tradition maintained by working professionals, and that this country's greatest strength is its ability to embrace people from all over the world who are willing to work hard and respect the culture they are joining. Do you consider yourself German or American?" "Texan," Greta replied with a smile, "which is its own category that includes both my German heritage and my American citizenship. Cowboys have always come from everywhere. I am just another immigrant who learned the skills and became a part of the tradition." As the gathering came to a close and Greta drove home under the vast Texas sky, she reflected on her 15 years of transformation. The Wehrmacht officer who had thought cowboys were a Hollywood invention had become a rancher, teaching the next generation the skills that defined Texas's identity. The prisoner who had been shocked to see real cowboys on horseback had become a cowgirl herself, a living testament to the fact that the most important American traditions were those that remained flexible enough to welcome newcomers. "Real cowboys," she had said with disbelief on that first day, watching the riders work the cattle across the Texas plains. Now she was one of them, connected to traditions that went back for generations, maintaining skills that remained essential despite modernization, and passing on her knowledge to children who would carry the cowboy culture into the future. The journey from a skeptical prisoner to a respected rancher had been an unlikely one, but it reflected Texas's deepest truth. Cowboys were not museum pieces or Hollywood fantasies. They were living professionals who kept